quick video showing how to place these multi-layered images. Couple of principles first I just want to show. I'll just move this out of the way first. Now I notice you've got a picture here. We'll check this. That is, oh yeah, that's fine. Let's put that gradient there. Okay. Containers and frames in InDesign are like a container. So if you take a couple of different objects, like these two things here, and you say, I want to put these inside this frame. If you select both of those, the way you would do this basically is to cut the objects and then paste them into the frame. So I can cut these, select the frame, right click, but I don't get paste into as an option because the items need grouping. So if I do one object, cut, select that, and then paste into, that's successfully done it. It's basically trimmed it inside the frame. Double click, I can still select this object and move it around. Now if I want to do a group of things, group of those, cut them, select that, paste into, and then you've got something that moves with the frame, and you can still click into the arrow tool and then move it, rotate it. Click again and you'll go in layer by layer. So I can now just get the circle. This is all very useful stuff. Now the reason I show you that is because normally I wouldn't use this, leave this floating free. It should be in the frame because the best practice is to put that inside of that. I don't know what that's doing there. Because that's what the picture of containers are for. It might be flowing with text or any one or a number of reasons. So I'll show you that in a second. So first thing that I'm going to do is just place these two images so that we can get the layering that we want. Now the key thing is here, you can't just drag them in. You have to place them through the place command, Command D, Control D on Windows I think. Go to the 250 machine here. Was it left view down? No, right view down. Okay, so now the key thing in here is you won't see this unless you click options. The default looks like this. And if you don't know that to click this thing, then you won't see the settings that you need to change. So you've got to click options, then you can see show option imports, and you've got to click that on because it won't be on by default. And then when you select that item and go place, now you get this extra dialog box where you can choose layers. Layers you can go back at any time and change. But with this option to get the alpha channel, you only get that on placing it in this way. That's the key thing. It's really annoying that you can only get it at that, but that's just how it is. So here's this image, and it's come in with the mask, absolutely perfect. I'll just change it to high quality, so it'll show that as nice. So you get a really nice, beautiful mask without having to do anything fancy. The second part of the image is going to be the shadow that's underneath, so I'll just grab that as well. That was the 250. God, I can't remember which one is which. That one, yeah. So many images for this now. Okay, so that. Now you don't have to go through this process, you can place it as normally or even drag it in the JPEG. The other thing as well is that you can actually use the PSD for both of these options. I just habitually have used the JPEG as well as the Photoshop because that way I can look at I know the JPEG is the one that's multiplied over and the Photoshop one is the one that's deep etched or masked without having to figure out if I just use the Photoshop for both, one of them is going to be masked and one of them is going to be multiplied, and you can't immediately tell which is which sometimes you might need to do. So then you just group these two items. And again, you just select both of them. However, first I should make this one go to the back. Shortcut for that. And then I set this in effects to multiply. And then I select both items. And then I just use center, center, group them. Now you have a single entity which you can place in your document, and it behaves with this nice, as you can see, you've got this color bleed shadow, reflection, sorry, and looks very natural and is super easy to use. Now the other thing you want to do is just scale this up to roughly match what you had there. That's about right. And so this lets you do all sorts of nice things, because you might sometimes want to break this image out of the container, in which case you might do it like that and say, well, this is going to come up, you know, above or below the container, whatever you might be doing. Or if you want to contain it within the box, it's best to put it in the box. So we will, knowing this from the earlier little demo, these are grouped now, so I can cut them as one item and select this container, right click and paste into. Now this is a single item which I can scale the whole frame, or I can just scale just the frame, and I can move it together and they stay together. So I always prefer to do a layout like that. So now you can still double click into that and scale that however you need to position this the way that you might want. The other thing that you will see in some of the other files that I've done, the older ones where there's a reflection under them, is that I will often fade the reflection, or sometimes the shadow too. These ones have actually been masked to fade off in Photoshop already, but I don't always do that because sometimes you don't want that to fade off. If you are cropping it in tightly and keeping the background, you might not want to fade the shadow out because it does make it look slightly unnatural. But we do it so that you don't see an edge. Now, for that I would use the gradient feather tool, not the regular gradient feather. And this is a really useful tool because you can assign that to a container. So this is putting a gradient over the entire container. If I double click the tool, it'll let me access the gradient and see that's what it is there. It could be radial, or and this is fading the whole. You can't see that because there's another grey box locked underneath it, but this is all fading out, the whole container, background and the image. Now I'll just undo that again, and where that effect shows up is under here. You don't see this necessarily just here, but if you expand it out, it is down in that box. But I can delete it by binning that if I don't want to have that anymore. Also, I can put a gradient as I would with those reflections. Double click, now I've got the group that's inside here, and I can get the gradient feather tool again, and I could put a gradient, imagine this was a reflection on it, and I can fade out the image within the container. This is not affecting the container, just the grouped elements. Super, super flexible. You can just do this on an as-needs basis wherever you're doing in a layout. So I use these techniques all the time, and you'll sometimes find that you'll have a document of mine that will have used something like that in it. And the reason I do that again is because sometimes you will want to fade out an element and sometimes you won't. So I prefer not to put it on the Photoshop file because then it's set in concrete and you can't not have it any longer. You take away your options. So for me, I like ease of use and flexibility, both in not the whole lot. I think that covers everything. So sometimes, I think this came up before, that you were having trouble with the text box on one of these things because, a picture box, because I think I had this gradient on there, and it can get potentially confusing if you don't keep track of what you're doing with that, because I can have a gradient on the contained elements, and then I can have a gradient on this box as well, and now I've got two gradients going on, and you might be not immediately sure where the effect is. But key thing to realize is that it does show up over here as an effect that is on this thing. So you can delete it there and then double click that object, and you can see that there's one on that, and then delete that too. So it's really easy to get to those things. Anyway, hopefully that helps you out. You can refer back to this whenever you like. If I went through it too quickly, play me back on slow motion.